My mom cried when I said I'd had enough. My dad called me a disgrace. My brother didn't say a word. But I'll never forget the way they looked at me when I chose myself. I still remember the exact chill that ran through me when I opened that email. I was 23, just out of college, doing the little victory dance you do when an internship finally turns into a maybe this can be my life kind of thing. I'd worked nights at a cafe, lived on instant noodles more nights than I'd like to admit, and felt, finally, like things were tilting in my direction. Then my inbox lied to me. Or so I thought. The subject line said something boring, like account notice. I clicked it, expecting a routine message about payment due dates or a promotional offer. Instead, one line in bold, $170,000. My eyes skimmed it twice, then 3 times, hoping my brain would correct what my screen insisted was true. $170,000. For a hot second I laughed out loud at the absurdity. There had to be an extra zero, right? Maybe some intern typed a phantom number. Maybe the bank meant $17,000. Maybe anything but this. My hands started shaking. I called my mom before I'd even finished reading the email. My throat felt dry, like I'd swallowed sand. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, the bank says I owe $170,000. What is this? She made it sound casual, like I'd asked whether we needed milk. Probably a mistake, sweetie. Don't worry, we'll sort it out. Her voice had that floaty tone she uses when she's trying to move on to the next thing. I could hear dishes clinking in the background. My calm unraveled a little. No, Mom. This isn't a little thing. That's life-changing. I could feel the words getting louder inside me. She paused, and the pause was a universe. Finally she admitted, vaguely, as if confessing to something embarrassing, that they'd taken out a loan in my name to cover college costs. It shouldn't be that much, she said. Her voice thinned. Then she said the part that made my stomach drop through the floor. We took out the full amount, just to make sure you had enough if your scholarship didn't cover everything. Her words spun in my head. Full amount? Scholarship? I'd gotten a decent scholarship. I'd paid part of my tuition with my savings and shifts at the cafe. I didn't need, and I certainly didn't authorize, $170,000. I drove to their house the next weekend because I needed to see them, to look at them while they explained how anyone could put this on my shoulders. The neighborhood smelled like cut grass and something baked, everything looked perfectly ordinary, and that normalcy made me angrier. How could life go on so calmly when someone had just handed me a financial bomb? They were waiting in the living room like they'd rehearsed the scene, my dad in his chair, arms folded in the I'm concerned way, my mom with that gentle, apologetic smile that always made me want to believe her. I didn't do small talk. I sat down and told them exactly what the bank said, how I felt, and what I needed, transparency. My dad sighed and launched into his version of the story. We were trying to do right by both of you, he said, like the line would smooth it all out. Do right by both of us? What did that even mean? I pressed for specifics. How much did they take, where did the money go, and most importantly, why in my name? That's when reality turned into a punch in the gut. They confessed, of the loan, $80,000 had been handed to Evan, my twin, to help with his career. Evan, who hadn't even gone to college, who'd been chasing a modeling gig and changing outfits more than jobs. $80,000. Given to him. In that moment I felt something cold and hollow open up inside my chest. I'd been fighting my way through school, scraping together shifts and scholarships, and they'd quietly rerouted money in my name to bankroll my brother's dreams. Why not take a loan in his name? I asked, incredulous. Why use mine? They had reasons. His credit wasn't great, he lacked collateral, they couldn't get a loan under his name, the excuses stacked up like a paper wall. Each sentence sounded thinner than the one before. I kept picturing the loan application, my name filling boxes I'd never seen, my future quietly signed away while I slept. I remember standing up, pacing. The wooden floor creaked under my shoes, and I could hear my own pulse in my ears. My dad tried to appeal to family duty, to the idea that we help one another. My mother teared up and spoke about sacrifice and how they'd always tried to keep things equal. But how is it equal when one brother gets a financial safety net and the other inherits a debt twice the size of what he actually needed? I tried to keep my voice under control, but the heat in my throat kept rising. I'm not paying for someone else's choices, I said, and it felt like saying it made it real. I told them flatly, either you make Evan pay back his share, or you figure out how to cover it yourselves. I wasn't going to be the family ATM for mistakes I didn't make. My mom's face hardened in a way I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and she'd scolded me for breaking a vase. She called me selfish. You're being dramatic, she said. This is family. We do this for each other. Right then, I realized we were talking different languages. To them, family meant sacrifice without question. To me, family meant accountability. I left their house with my jaw clenched and my hands balled into fists. The late afternoon sun burned my back like an accusation. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel, wondering how I had become the owner of a debt so absurd it felt like a cruel joke. How was I supposed to build a life, save for an apartment, or take a chance on a job in another city when my name was shadowed by $170,000? That night I lay awake thinking of numbers, monthly payments, interest rates, what a collection notice might sound like. Anger mixed with this strange, fierce resolve. I could feel my future shrinking under the weight of their decision, and I didn't like feeling trapped. So I made a choice in that quiet, heated moment. I wouldn't let fear or guilt bully me into footing someone else's bill. I wasn't going to be manipulated into silently repaying a sum that had nothing to do with my choices. I didn't know how I was going to do it yet, but I knew one thing crystal clear: I was going to make them answer for this. I went back to my laptop, opened a blank document, and started typing questions: loan paperwork, signatures, who signed what, when the funds were disbursed, and whether there were records showing the money transfer to Evan. I typed so fast my fingers ached. I promised myself I'd get copies of every paper, every form. I promised myself I'd talk to a lawyer if I had to. Hell, I promised myself I'd drag this into daylight even if it wrecked family dinner for a while. They tried to shame me. They tried the guilt routine: we did it for you, we wanted what's best, but I was done being quiet. I was done being polite while my life was negotiated behind my back. And then, after weeks of asking, prodding, and being stonewalled, I did something that surprised even me, something that finally forced this hidden mess into the open. But that part? That's where things really got messy, and I'm not ready to tell you about it just yet. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this blows up. After that train wreck of a conversation with my parents, I went home and just sat there on my couch, stewing. Every corner of my apartment felt too small for how angry I was. My chest was tight, my jaw was locked, and every time I thought about that $170,000 number, it burned hotter in my head. I wasn't going to roll over and accept a mountain of debt because my parents decided to play favorites with their golden child. Not a chance. I knew if I confronted them again, I needed to come in armed with facts, not just emotions. So, over the next few days, I practically lived online, reading, watching videos, calling people I trusted, trying to understand every little detail about student loans, borrower rights, repayment structures, and legal protections. It was like drowning in financial jargon. But bit by bit, I pieced it together. And what I learned made me even angrier. They hadn't just overborrowed, they'd taken out way more than necessary, in my name, while I had barely understood what was happening. When I finally drove back to their house, I wasn't just upset, I was ready. I walked in, and of course, they were sitting in the living room watching TV like everything was sunshine and rainbows. The contrast between their calm and my storm made me want to laugh, except it wasn't funny. It felt like they were living in some alternate universe where their actions hadn't basically detonated my financial future. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I planted myself across from them and said, "All right, we need to talk." My dad paused the TV. My mom sighed, long and dramatic, like I was inconveniencing them. That sigh alone nearly set me off. I started laying everything out, one piece at a time: what the loan should have been, what I actually owed, how the extra $80,000 was completely unnecessary. As I talked, I watched their faces shift. My mom's eyes narrowed slightly, her jaw setting like she was gearing up for a guilt trip. My dad just leaned back with his arms crossed like he was sitting through a lecture he didn't want to hear. When I finally said, "Why didn't you just take out a separate loan for Evan if he needed the money?" my dad decided to jump in. He sighed and said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, "You have to understand, your brother wasn't in a position to get a loan. His grades weren't great, and we didn't want him to start off his adult life with that kind of burden." I actually laughed. Not the happy kind, the sharp, bitter kind. "So instead, you decided to dump that burden on me?" My voice was rising despite how hard I was trying to keep it steady. I worked my ass off for years to make sure I wouldn't have that kind of burden. And now, because Evan couldn't get his act together, I'm supposed to carry his debt too. My dad started throwing around words like equality and family, as if they were magic spells that would make me forget what they did. But all I could hear was the unspoken message: Evan's choices mattered more than mine. Their son who didn't go to college got a financial cushion. Their son who actually worked for his future got a bill. I stared them dead in the eye and said, "I'm not paying back the $80,000 you gave to him. Not 1 cent. My mom went pale, like I'd just said something unspeakable. Her eyes started to well up, and that was her cue. She launched into the "we did this for the family" speech, the same one I've heard my whole life whenever I was expected to sacrifice something for Evan. I cut her off before she could finish. How is giving Evan $80,000 for whatever fantasy he's chasing the same as me paying for my education? How? She didn't have an answer. Just more tears. My dad jumped in again, raising his voice this time, accusing me of being too harsh and not understanding the pressure they were under. And that's when something inside me snapped. "What about the pressure I'm under?" I shouted back. "You're not the ones with a $170,000 debt hanging over your name. I am." We went in circles for what felt like hours, me calling out the choices they made, them trying to wrap it in warm words and excuses. My frustration kept building with every sentence they dodged. And then I took a deep breath and changed tactics. "I'm done talking in circles," I said finally. "If you don't figure out how to pay back that $80,000, I'll take legal action." The silence that followed was heavy. My dad's eyes went wide like I'd just pulled the pin out of a grenade. My mom looked like she might collapse right there. They both started begging me not to do anything drastic, saying it would tear the family apart. But I wasn't a scared kid anymore. I was a grown adult staring down decades of debt that wasn't mine. I told them, as calmly as I could, "Either you find a way to pay it back, or I'll protect myself. I won't let your choices destroy my future." My mom, still crying, promised they'd find a solution. I didn't believe her, not for a second. My dad didn't even try to argue anymore. I think, for the first time, he actually saw I wasn't bluffing. When I stood to leave, my mom called after me, voice shaking, "Are you really going to go through with this?" I turned around, looked her in the eye, and said, "If I have to, yeah, I will." Driving home felt like my brain was a blender: anger, sadness, disappointment, all spinning together. I never wanted things to turn into some kind of legal standoff with my own parents. But what choice did they leave me? They'd cornered me. And I wasn't going to just lie down and accept it. By the time I collapsed onto my couch, I was completely drained. My ceiling fan hummed overhead while I stared at it, empty and furious at the same time. I knew this was just the beginning. I'd have to talk to lawyers. Protect my credit. Untangle myself from a mess I didn't create. It wasn't going to be easy. But I also knew this time, I wasn't backing down. Not for them. Not for guilt. Not for anyone. After that showdown, I couldn't just sit around waiting for them to miraculously fix the mess they'd made. If there was one brutal lesson from that night, it was this: my parents weren't going to take responsibility unless someone squeezed them until they had to. So I decided I wasn't going to be the person who waited for an apology that never came. I was going to find out exactly what happened, every signature, every transfer, every shady little line in the paperwork, and I was going to use it. I spent the next couple of days in what I can only describe as a paper hunting spiral. Thrilling? No. Necessary? Absolutely. I pulled every document I could get my hands on: old loan agreements, bank statements from the years I was at college, emails with subject lines that made me cringe, and even those stupid enrollment bills I'd always kept because I was organized in a way that now felt embarrassingly naive. I made a mess on my kitchen table: pens, sticky notes, printed bank screens, and I got to work. At first it was a blur of numbers and bank jargon that might as well have been another language. But then patterns started to show. My tuition bills didn't match the disbursement amounts on the loan docs. The sum on paper that I had supposedly borrowed for school was way higher than the actual invoices from the college. That discrepancy? Not a rounding error. Not a clerical quirk. Intentional. It was someone padding the numbers, to the tune of $80,000. And then I found the clause that made my stomach drop. When I turned 18, my parents had me sign a handful of things. At the time I thought I was doing the sensible grown-up thing, giving them permission to help manage accounts while I concentrated on classes and work. I trusted them. I was young and trusting. Rookie mistake. That signature, which I barely remembered scribbling, included authorization for them to access my checking account and handle certain transactions. On paper it looked like parental assistance. In reality, it was an open door. They used that access to sweep extra funds, the mysterious 80 grand, out of the loan distributions and into Evan's accounts. They didn't call. They didn't ask. They just clicked, signed, and redirected my future into their version of helping Evan. Do you know that slow burn feeling when betrayal sets in? Like a cold that starts in your toes and works its way up until it's lodged behind your ribs? That's what hit me. These were the people who'd bandaged scraped knees and stayed up because I'd had nightmares, and they'd quietly weaponized my signature against me. I felt stupid and furious at once. But anger, while deliciously righteous, doesn't pay bills. So I learned to translate fury into action. I dug through consumer protection pages until I could recite the statute of limitations in my sleep. I read about unauthorized transactions, borrower rights, and whether you can legally challenge a loan if someone else directed where the money went without your informed consent. It was complicated and full of caveats, timelines, forms, documentation thresholds. There were deadlines that could close doors forever if you missed them. I kept thinking, what if I'd slept on this? What if I'd trusted them to figure it out? The thought made my stomach flip. I couldn't let time be their ally. And then there was Evan. My brother. The golden child who apparently thought $80,000 was some money rather than a life-altering sum. I couldn't let my whole future evaporate while he carried on like nothing happened. So I decided to catch him at a moment when my parents weren't around, late at night, when the house is quiet and people's defenses are down. Waiting up for him felt like staking out a suspect in a crime drama. I made coffee that tasted like regret and sat at the kitchen table with the lights low. His car pulled in around 1 a.m., tires whispering across gravel, and when he came in I tried to be casual, the "Hey, how's it going?" opener. I wanted him to let his guard down. I wanted answers. At first he treated it like small talk. Then I said the words plain and cold: "Do you realize how much trouble I'm in because mom and dad gave you money?" His face went blank, that slow blink of someone trying to compute information by osmosis. When I told him the exact figure, he shrugged like I'd told him about a sale at a store he didn't care about. "What money?" he said. I almost laughed, if laughing hadn't made me feel even more insane. I explained it again, 80 grand in his hands, taken out in my name, my credit now shackled to their choices. He stared, then said, with the casual cruelty of someone who's never had to sacrifice, "Oh, I thought they just gave me some money to help with stuff. I spent it on trips and going out." Trips. Going out. $80,000. My voice went to a place I didn't like. "You spent how much on stuff?" I demanded. He shrugged like paying a mortgage was a problem in another country. "It's not my fault they gave it to me," he said. "I didn't ask for it." And there it was, the core irritation. He didn't see the moral obligation because his life hadn't required it. To him, money appeared and opportunities followed, responsibility was someone else's chore. I felt something harden inside me, not hate, but an icy resolve. I told him, plainly, I wasn't paying it back. "Figure it out," I said. "Or I'll make you figure it out in court." He laughed, like I'd said "bless you" after a sneeze. "Good luck with that," he said, flipping onto the couch like our family drama was a sitcom rerun. I walked out of that kitchen in a fury I'd never known, but also oddly focused. The anger had sharpened into a plan. I would gather every scrap of evidence, signatures, bank transfers, emails that hinted at intent. I'd contact consumer protection, speak to a lawyer, and if necessary, challenge this in court. I would not be the hapless kid who woke up years later with a wrecked credit score and a life shackled to someone else's choices. I crashed into my bed and stared at the ceiling, mind racing through the next steps like a checklist. Who to call first? How to get transaction records? What bills could I request? The to-do list was long and, frankly, terrifying. But the scariest part wasn't the paperwork, it was how this would fracture our family further. And that's the part one couldn't stop thinking about. Would I really take them to court? Would I drag my parents, the people I grew up trusting, into a legal battle that could destroy holidays, calls home, the whole illusion of normal? Or would I find a way to force Evan and them to do the right thing quietly? I knew what I had to do next, and it wasn't pleasant. But it was necessary. I was about to make a move that would either free me from this $170,000 shadow, or blow the whole thing wide open in a way none of us could ignore. After that blow up with Evan, I went home and just sat in silence for a long time. My apartment felt too quiet, too small for how heavy my chest felt. It honestly felt like someone had sucker punched me in the gut and left me gasping. My parents refused to take responsibility. Evan acted like he'd just borrowed a spare $5, not $80,000. And me? I was the one holding the bag. Alone. But here's the thing about me, I don't fold easy. If they thought I was just going to eat a $170,000 debt with a polite smile, they were out of their minds. I needed to stop reacting and start taking control. No more pleading. No more hoping they'd magically do the right thing. So, I decided to give them one last shot. One last shot. I called my mom and told her I was coming over. She sounded tense, she knew something was up, but I didn't give details. I just said, "We need to talk." And that was it. My hands were actually shaking as I hung up. When I got there, it was the same depressing déjà vu. They were lounging in the living room watching TV like we weren't in the middle of a financial war. I sat down, took a deep breath, and forced myself to speak calmly. I went over everything again, the debt, the loan, the extra $80,000, the mess they'd made in my name. Predictably, my mom started tearing up, repeating the same tired lines about how they never meant for it to get this bad, how they just wanted to help Evan, how they thought I'd be able to handle it. I'd heard that song before, and it hit different now. It didn't soften me anymore, it just made me tired. This isn't about Evan anymore, I told her, cutting through her tears. This is about what you did to me. You didn't just borrow money. You used my name. You used my future. And then I dropped the hammer. I've talked to a lawyer, I said slowly. What you did, taking out more money than I needed, using my account to transfer funds, fabricating school expenses, is illegal. If you don't pay it back, I'll file a lawsuit. The room went dead silent. My mom's tears changed instantly, not sadness this time, but panic. My dad's eyes narrowed like he was scanning me for weakness. But I wasn't bluffing. They could feel it. He tried to play the calm negotiator. Isn't there some other way we can settle this? Without lawyers? I shook my head. There's only one way. You pay it back. I'm not ruining my life because you wanted to gamble on Evan. My mom started begging, saying they didn't have the money, that taking this to court would destroy the family. For half a second, guilt tried to creep in. But then I remembered sleepless nights, panic attacks, that first email from the bank. I remembered how they let me carry their mess in silence. That guilt didn't stand a chance. So I gave them a deadline. 2 weeks, I said flatly. You have 2 weeks to come up with a plan to repay that $80,000. If not, I'm filing the lawsuit. My dad snapped at me, accusing me of being unreasonable, of tearing the family apart over money. But I didn't budge. You're the ones who put me in this position, I shot back. I'm just trying to survive it. We went back and forth for what felt like hours. They begged. I held the line. Finally, my dad muttered something about seeing what we can do, his jaw clenched in anger. My mom kept crying. And for the first time in this entire nightmare, I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. When I walked out, I was emotionally wiped. But beneath the exhaustion, there was a small flicker of relief. I'd drawn the line. Over the next 2 weeks, my phone barely buzzed. A few guilt-drenched texts from my mom asking me to please reconsider, telling me how hard this was on them. But I didn't waver. I kept replying with the same message, 2 weeks. And while they stalled, I prepared. I printed out every document. I organized bank statements, loan records, emails. I had a timeline, transaction logs, even proof of how they accessed my account. I met with my lawyer again to make sure I was ready to pull the trigger the second the deadline passed. My friends and my girlfriend were supportive but worried. They kept asking if I was sure about suing my parents. And honestly, I wasn't happy about it. No one dreams about dragging their own family to court. But if I didn't fight back now, I'd be chained to this debt for the rest of my life. When the deadline came, silence. No calls. No messages. Just nothing. I stared at my phone that day, feeling that cold finality sink in. They were really going to call my bluff. Except it wasn't a bluff. I sent my mom one last text. Deadline's today. If I don't hear from you by midnight, I'm filing first thing in the morning. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. I felt angry. I felt sad. I felt terrified. But I also felt free. Because I'd done everything I could to give them a chance. What happened next was on them. And then, at 7:42 a.m. the next morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. Just a few lines, but it said everything. We're working on getting the money together. Please don't do anything yet. We'll talk soon. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first sign they finally realized I wasn't bluffing. I gave them one more week, and made it crystal clear that if they tried to stall again, I wouldn't hesitate. This was far from over. But for the first time, the ball wasn't in their court anymore. It was in mine. After that last message from my mom, everything slowed to a crawl. I felt stuck in this strange limbo, not moving forward, not moving back, just waiting. waiting to see if they were actually going to do the right thing or if this was just another round of emotional manipulation designed to wear me down. Every hour felt longer than the last. My phone became this stupid little lifeline I couldn't stop staring at. I checked it constantly, messages, missed calls, notifications, even though I knew nothing new was there. It was like waiting for an earthquake, tense, quiet, but with something massive looming beneath the surface. I tried to stay calm, tried to remind myself that I had a plan. But the silence was brutal. And in that silence, my brain wouldn't shut up. I kept thinking about what this had done to my family, how everything that used to feel familiar had rotted into this ugly, tangled mess. Honestly, I didn't even recognize us anymore. And maybe there was no going back after this. Then, one night, way too late, my phone lit up. My dad. The second I picked up, he was already yelling. No hello. No pause. Just rage. He started in about how I was tearing this family apart, how I was selfish, how they'd sacrificed everything for me and this was how I repaid them. His voice wasn't just angry, it was desperate. I could hear it cracking at the edges. Then came the guilt bombs. Do you really want to be the reason your mother ends up in the hospital, and Evan's struggling enough as it is, now you want to make it worse? Same script. Different night. I let him go on until he ran out of breath. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steadier than I felt. Dad, this isn't about tearing the family apart. This is about what's fair. You and Mom put me in this position. I didn't ask for it. I'm protecting myself. He didn't want to hear it. He just kept shouting, accusing me of being unreasonable, selfish, cold. Telling me to just trust them, to handle it. And that part almost made me laugh. Trust? The people who stole $80,000 out of my future and handed it to Evan like pocket change? The people who lied to my face and called it help? No. I told him I'd already given them more chances than they deserved. If they didn't come up with the money, I'd go through with the lawsuit. Period. He yelled more, but I cut him off. Dad, this conversation isn't going anywhere. I've made my decision. I'm not backing down. Click. He hung up. I just sat there in the dark, staring at my phone. His words stung, not because they were true, but because they came from him. My dad. The man who was supposed to have my back. It felt like another punch to the gut. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages from my mom. Long, rambling texts, some pleading, some guilt-tripping, some trying to play the "but we're your family" card. She said things like, "We'd never hurt you, and Evan needs your support, not your anger." I didn't let myself fall for it this time. I'd been down that road too many times. It always ended with me paying, literally or emotionally, and them walking away clean. So I just reminded her of the deadline. Calm. Unshakable. The next few days crawled by. Still nothing. My gut told me they were stalling, hoping I'd fold at the last minute. But they clearly didn't know me anymore. I wasn't that kid they could guilt into silence. Then, on the final day of the deadline, my phone rang again. Evan. For a second, I almost didn't answer. But I did. His voice wasn't angry, not like Dad's, but tired. He said he was sorry things had gotten this bad, that he wished there was something he could do. I didn't say much. I just let him talk. He admitted he'd been stupid. That he shouldn't have taken the money without asking questions. That he should have been more responsible. And for a second, hearing him finally say those words, I felt something ease just a little. But then he said it, he had no way to pay it back. He wasn't making money from modeling gigs, barely scraping by. He couldn't give me a single dollar. And as much as I appreciated him finally admitting fault, it didn't change a damn thing. I told him, that's not on me, Evan. You took it. They gave it. I'm the one stuck with it. If you can't pay it back, then Mom and Dad need to figure it out. He sighed, said he'd talk to them, but even he sounded like he knew it was a lost cause. We ended the call tense, quiet. I sat there staring at the wall, feeling like this weight on my chest just doubled. The next morning, my lawyer emailed me asking if I was ready to file. My throat went dry. This was it, the point of no return. I sent one final text to my mom, deadline's today. If I don't hear from you, I'll be filing in the morning. Hours passed. Nothing. I was already bracing myself, making peace with the fact that I was about to take my parents to court. It felt unreal. Like living in someone else's life. And then, just as I was about to shut off my phone, a message from my dad. We've managed to pull some money together. We'll pay you back in installments. No apology. No acknowledgement of the hell they'd put me through. Just a promise of payments. It wasn't the big victory I'd imagined. But it was something. It was proof that I'd finally forced their hand. I texted back, making it clear, if they missed a single payment, I'd file the lawsuit. No second chances. No emotional blackmail. He agreed. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control return to my life. It wasn't a clean win. It came with scars and broken trust that would probably never heal. But it was a win. And as I sat there staring at that final message, I realized something. I'd stopped being the family's safety net. I'd finally chosen me. When my dad agreed to start paying me back in installments, I actually let myself breathe for the first time in months. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for, but it was something. A crack of light after what had felt like a never-ending tunnel. For a moment, I thought maybe we could slowly, somehow, piece things back together. That maybe, with time, I could rebuild something with them. Foolish, right? Because just when I started to let my guard down, they did exactly what they've always done. The first few payments came in like clockwork. I remember staring at the deposit the first time it hit, my chest tightening with cautious relief. I started letting myself imagine a future where this weight slowly lifted off me, brick by brick. I clung to that tiny bit of hope like it was oxygen. And then, silence. The next payment date came and went. Nothing. No notification, no explanation. I refreshed my bank app so many times I thought I was going to wear a hole in the screen. At first, I tried to be rational. Maybe it's delayed. Maybe something came up. But deep down, that familiar knot in my stomach was already forming. A few more days passed. Still nothing. Then weeks. That knot turned into fire. They'd done it again, dangled a promise in front of me, just long enough to make me believe it, and then pulled the rug out from under my feet. I was done. I grabbed my phone and started typing. My fingers were shaking, not from fear this time, but from sheer anger. I told them they'd missed the payment and I wasn't letting this slide. I gave them until the end of the day to explain themselves. If I didn't hear from them by then, I'd file the lawsuit first thing in the morning. Then came the waiting. Hours of pacing around my apartment, checking my phone every 5 minutes like a man possessed. The silence felt like mockery. Finally, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. I didn't even have to open the message to know what it would say. I could practically hear the guilt-laced tone in my head before I read it. She said they were sorry for missing the payment, but things had been difficult lately. They didn't have the money right now. She asked me to be patient, to understand. I felt my jaw tighten with every word. Understand? After everything they'd put me through? This wasn't about understanding. This was about them once again trying to buy time and hoping I'd get tired and give up. I texted her back, and this time, I didn't sugarcoat a thing. I told her I'd given them more than enough chances. I'd waited, I'd compromised, and they'd still failed to do the bare minimum. If they didn't have the money by tomorrow, I was filing the lawsuit. End of discussion. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying every conversation, every promise, every lie. I kept thinking about how I'd gotten here, how they had gotten me here. They'd always prioritized Evan. Always expected me to be the responsible one, the fixer, the one who quietly sacrificed to keep the peace. I wasn't that person anymore. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My chest was tight, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep. But my mind? Clear. I made my coffee, pulled out the folder with every piece of evidence I'd collected, loan documents, bank statements, screenshots of their promises. I was ready. Just as I was about to walk out the door to meet with my lawyer, my phone rang. It was my mom. For a second, I considered ignoring it. But something in me said, pick up. The moment I answered, I heard her crying. Full-on, gut-wrenching sobs. She begged me not to go through with the lawsuit. She said they'd figure something out, that they'd get the money somehow. Her voice cracked in a way that almost made me flinch. And for just a split second, guilt hit me like a sucker punch. This was my mom. My mom. I didn't want to be the one to rip my family apart. But then I remembered everything, the years of them choosing Evan, the lies, the betrayal, the debt hanging around my neck like a noose. That guilt didn't stand a chance against reality. I've given you every chance, I told her. I'm not backing down. She kept crying. Kept begging. But I just repeated the same words, steady and calm, I'm not backing down. Eventually, she hung up. And I stood there, phone in my hand, feeling like I'd just walked through fire barefoot. I hated how much it hurt. But I hated even more how much they'd put me in this position in the first place. That afternoon, I sat in my lawyer's office, signing papers that felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. It felt surreal, suing my own parents. I never imagined my life would turn into this kind of story. Over the next few days, word got out. Family members, cousins, friends, everyone had something to say. Some people told me I was doing the right thing. Others called me selfish. One aunt even accused me of ruining the family over a little money. A little money. $80,000 wasn't a little money. It stung. It really did. But none of them had lived through the sleepless nights, the betrayal, the pressure, the way my life had been thrown off course because of someone else's choices. They only saw the headline, Kid Sues Parents. And I'll be honest, it felt like I was losing everything. My family. My support system. The little thread of normalcy I'd been clinging to. But I had to keep reminding myself why I was doing this. I was doing it because I deserved better. Because my future mattered, too. Because I was tired of being the one who always paid the price. It was messy. Painful. Heartbreaking, even. But as I walked out of that office, lawsuit in motion, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the loud, explosive kind, but a quiet, steady strength. I'd stopped being their scapegoat. I'd stopped letting them write my story for me. This time, the ending would be mine. Now here we are. It's been a few weeks since I officially filed the lawsuit against my parents, and to be honest, this has been one of the hardest, most soul-crushing things I've ever done. I never pictured my life going this way. I never imagined sitting across from lawyers, hearing my parents' names on legal documents, or waking up every morning with that cold knot in my stomach reminding me I was fighting my own family in court. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be suing my parents, I would have laughed. No way. That's something you read about in tragic online posts, not something that actually happens to you. But here I am. The moment the news spread through the family, it was like lighting a fuse. Everyone had an opinion, and nobody stayed neutral. Some of my cousins quietly messaged me, saying they were proud of me for standing up for myself. A few even said they'd wish they'd had the courage to set their own boundaries with their parents. But a lot of the older relatives weren't nearly as kind. I can still hear their voices, family should come first. You don't air dirty laundry in public. They're your parents. But what they never seemed to ask was, what kind of parents do this to their kid in the first place? They expected me to swallow it, take the hit, keep quiet, for the sake of appearances. For peace. But that so-called peace was already shattered the moment my parents signed my name on that loan. Evan, of course, played his part like clockwork. He kept acting like I was the villain. The word ungrateful got thrown around so many times it started to lose meaning. Apparently, I was supposed to be grateful for being saddled with $170,000 in debt so he could party his way through his 20s. Right. The court process itself started slowly, as expected. A lot of legal back and forth, filings, deadlines, lawyer meetings. All the behind-the-scenes stuff that makes your head spin. My lawyer was great, though, patient, clear, steady. He explained things like I wasn't some clueless kid, and that made the whole nightmare a little more bearable. But each signature, each piece of paper I signed, was a punch to the gut. A reminder that this wasn't just some ugly dream. This was my real life. Then, about a week ago, I got the call. My lawyer told me my parents wanted to settle. I could have laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. They'd finally realized I wasn't going to break. And more than that, they'd realized how much this would cost them if it went all the way to court. We met at my lawyer's office for the settlement talk. I remember walking in and seeing them, my parents, sitting there on the other side of the table. My mom looked small, tired, like the weight of this had finally hit her. She couldn't even look me in the eye. My dad, he just looked angry. Like he was still convinced I was the one who'd betrayed them. The air in that room was so thick you could practically chew it. My lawyer did most of the talking, which was probably for the best. My parents tried to negotiate, of course they did, offering to pay less than what they owed, dancing around responsibility like they always had. But my lawyer shut that down fast. Calm. Precise. He reminded them that my case was solid, that if this went to trial, it wouldn't just be $80,000 on the line, it would be more. Eventually, they caved. They agreed to pay the full $80,000 plus my legal fees. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. That I walked out of there feeling vindicated. But the truth? It felt hollow. I got what I fought for, but at the cost of my family. Evan didn't even bother to show up. Of course he didn't. Why would he? He got what he wanted a long time ago, and now mom and dad were footing the bill. I don't think accountability has ever even crossed his mind. When we were done, my mom tried to talk to me. She said she was sorry. That they never meant for it to get this bad. But when someone's apology is 10 miles too late, it doesn't land the way they think it will. I looked at her and just said, "It's too late." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I was just done. My dad didn't say a word. He just walked out. Didn't look back. And as I stood there watching them go, it hit me, this might be the last time I ever saw them not as mom and dad, but as two people who chose their golden son over their own integrity. And honestly, I wasn't sure I even wanted to rebuild anything after this. The settlement money came through a few days later. I paid off the remaining loan in one transaction. Just like that, I was debt-free. And yet, it didn't feel like victory. It felt quiet, heavy, empty. There's a hole where my family used to be. And it's not the kind that money can fix. My friends have been incredible through all this. My girlfriend has been a rock. They remind me every day that I'm not alone, even when it feels like I'm walking through the rubble of what used to be my family. But still, there's this ache. Because no matter how toxic it got, they were still my parents. And now, they're just people I used to know. I'm trying to move forward. My internship turned into a full-time job. I've been looking at apartments, maybe even a new city. I want a fresh start. A life that isn't chained to the decisions they made behind my back. But sometimes late at night, I ask myself, did I do the right thing? Would it have been easier to just eat the debt and keep the family intact? But then I remember the betrayal. The lies. The way they treated me like a walking ATM. And I know I made the only choice that protected my future. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels lonely. But it's still right. And that's where I am now, standing in the quiet aftermath, figuring out what comes next. Rebuilding my life without the people who should have had my back from the start. It's not easy, and some days I feel the weight of it more than others. But underneath all the mess, something's shifted. I trust myself now. I know my worth. And for the first time in my life, I'm living it on my own terms.